those that don't know me already, my name is Mike Drues. This morning I'm going to be talking a little bit about 3D printing and specifically some of the regulatory challenges that poses in 3D printing. But before we get into that, I'd just like to see where we are as an audience. Who all is doing some form of medical 3D printing right now? A couple of you, all right. And who thinks that you're using the technology to its fullest potential? None of you, good. Well, I don't either. As a PhD in biomedical engineering, I find most of what's being done in 3D printing today, especially in medicine and medical devices, it just bores me to tears. It's the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. And one of the things I want to do in the few minutes that I have this morning is show you where we're going. But before we get there, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. Meet Alex. Watch this. There's supposed to be audio for
The Bionic Boy, a cutting-edge device, becomes an absolute life-changer for a boy who was born without an arm. And as it turns out, medical grad students were the driving force behind the breakthrough. And as Bob Howard explains, they did it on a budget.
Alex Pring was born missing part of his right arm, a smiling little boy perfectly happy to drive his toy car with one arm. But his parents always knew he might ask at some point if he could have another arm. He is now 6, and tonight, with the help of a team of grad students studying engineering at the University of Central Florida, he has that new arm. They documented his first moments picking up a football.
Good job, buddy.
It's a confidence thing. It's going to give him such a different outlook. He's going to have an idea in his head now that he's not different.
The engineering students were determined to make a boy happy and to prove something, that you can build a prosthetic arm and you do it without costing families tens of thousands of dollars.
I hope that people look at these other arms that cost $40,000. Although they have functionality, if we can do this for $350 in just 8 weeks, I'm sure that we're going to keep pioneering. But I hope people are upset. I mean, these arms should not cost $40,000.
Alex practicing with everything. A toy duck.
I got the duck. Do you notice you're not even...
His new arm was made on a 3D printer much like this one, running on batteries activated by Alex's own arm muscle. And this afternoon he showed us what happens when he flexes with his new arm.
Your muscle, right?
It makes energy so it opens and closes. Like this.
Every day a new milestone, offering a wave. But nothing as moving as that first moment after learning how to control his new arm. Turning to his mom for that first hug with both arms.
I lost it. I cried. But now it's more emotional because seeing all the things that he can do and like how happy he is, that's a lot.
Alex's bionic arm costing just a few $100s. His smile, priceless.
Anybody think that's cool? I know most of you are probably not from Boston. Anybody consider that wicked cool? As cool or perhaps wicked cool as that might seem, that is just the beginning. That is just the tip of the iceberg. Welcome to the future of medicine. This is personalized medicine, 3D printing. You know, the whole notion of making the same medical device, making thousands or millions of them and giving to millions of people, when you think about it, it makes absolutely no sense. So clearly, the future is personalized medicine, whether it's 3D printing for medical devices or 3D printing for drugs, as we'll talk a tiny bit about in a moment. That is clearly the future. Okay, so let's kick things up a notch or two, and let's talk about printing something a little more complicated than a prosthetic, and that is a knee. How about being able to print a prosthetic knee? Can we do that? Well, the short answer is yes, we already have. About 2 years ago, we brought the first 3D printed knee onto the market in the United States. By the way, in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that we now have about 100 medical devices that have come through the FDA and are on the market here in the US that are 3D printed. I've had my fingers in many of them. And in addition to that, we have had now one 3D printed drug come onto the market that was FDA approved about 2 years ago. So this is not nearly as far off as some people think. And the interesting thing about that is what I want to do is sort of a compare and contrast between the first 3D printed knee and the first 3D printed pill, because the regulatory strategy for both of those is exactly the same. No difference whatsoever. Exactly the same. So all of us are different. Why should all of our medical devices, or for that matter, all of our pills, be the same? We've been practicing medicine like that for hundreds of years, but when you think about it, it makes absolutely no sense. So I have another video. Maybe my friends in the back can launch that second video for me, the separate video on the knee, please.
Like science fiction, but Dr. Malika Marshall shows us a local company that's using 3D printing to rebuild knees.
Live from the Channel 4 studios in Boston, WBZ News at 11 starts right now.
Okay, this sounds like science fiction, but it is fact.
A 3D knee that's offering hope to millions of Americans who need replacement surgery. As Dr. Malcolm Marshall shows us, it's custom made by a local company.
We see a lot of knee injuries in here.
Overused joints just wearing out. Personal trainer Jeff Dosdell of Bodyscapes in Wellesley sees it all the time.
They've got arthritis, they've got overuse injuries, and the knees start to wear out on you.
Even for some people in their 30s and 40s, and a lot of folks end up having surgery.
Knee replacement is the most common joint replacement worldwide.
Providing huge relief most of the time. Dr. Philip Lang, co-founder of Conformis, a medical device company in Bedford, says about a quarter of patients aren't happy with their results.
They have pain, they have limited range of motion, the knee doesn't feel natural.
So Conformis is changing that. Conformis is the only company in the world that is making knee replacement implants that are completely tailored to each individual patient.
In other words,
using
personalized
CT
medicine.
imaging, special computer software, and 3D printer technology, scientists produce a unique knee implant and customized surgical instruments designed for one patient and only that patient.
This fits exactly to your patient. It brings back your individual knee, the shape of your knee, the curvatures of your knee, and so as such it should move like a normal knee.
No two knees are the same, and off-the-shelf implants come in a limited number of sizes.
Okay, you get
and
the
a bad
idea.
fit,
If we can
says
cut off the
orthopedic
video now and
surgeon
go back to the slides, please. Thank you. So the question is, how would we bring this onto the market? Again, this is personalized medicine, but let's be honest, our regulatory environment is not designed for this kind of our product. Our regulatory environment, in fact, favors Me Too's, favors the blockbuster approach. In other words, let's think about this for a second. So if we're making a medical device that we're going to, the same device that we're going to give to thousands or millions of people, or for that matter, if we're making a pill that we're going to give to thousands or millions of people, it makes sense to test that device or that pill in a clinical trial of maybe a couple of dozen or a couple of hundred people. But with personalized medicine, when your patient population becomes one person, when we're making one device for one person, when we're making one pill for one person, what does a clinical trial even look like? Is it possible to do a clinical trial for N equals 1? Well, I believe there's a solution to every problem, including that. And this first step in the solution is to get people to think and to think differently. And that's not such an easy thing to do. So when I, as an engineer, look at a clinical trial, I see nothing more than a validation. And for those of you that know something about validation, you know there's two ways that you can do a validation. One way is to validate the product. And the way we do clinical trials today, whether it's a device or a drug, it doesn't matter, is to validate the product. But the other way to do a the other way to do a validation is to validate the process. And that is the solution to the clinical trial enigma that personalized medicine, whether it's for devices or drugs, provides. And that is to validate the process. That's how we're going to be able to do that. So coming back to the knee for a second, how do we bring this onto the market in the current regulatory environment that we have? We do definitely need a new regulatory pathway for personalized medicine. We don't have that yet. We've had a number of discussions at FDA. By the way, I should also say that I work as a consultant for the FDA, so I see a lot of these issues from both sides, but we don't have that yet. So the question is, pardon me, how do we bring this onto the market now? Well, what if I can show that the knee coming off of my 3D printer is basically the same as, i.e. substantially equivalent, as the knee coming off of my traditional manufacturing process? Let me say this one more time, because this is the crux of the regulatory logic. You can read the regulation from now until the sun burns out. It will never tell you how to do this. And by the way, many of the 3D printed products that I've been involved with were brought onto the market long before the 3D printed guidance came out. As a matter of fact, many of the standards that have been adopted in that guidance came from some of the technology, some of the testing methodologies that we developed as a result of those products. So coming back to the regulatory strategy, what if I can show that the knee coming off of my 3D printer is basically the same, i.e. substantially equivalent, as the knee coming off of my traditional manufacturing process? Would that be an advantage? The short answer is absolutely yes. Because if I can show that the knee is the same, now I can totally remove the knee from the equation. I don't have to say anything about the knee. And all I have to do is validate the process, which, oh, by the way, brings us back to that clinical trial enigma that I just mentioned a few moments ago. All right? So the crux, the first step is showing that the knee coming off of my 3D printer is the same as the knee coming off of my traditional manufacturing process. 3D printing is nothing more than a different way to manufacture. And FDA does not regulate manufacturing processes, at least not directly. We don't award 510Ks or de novos or PMAs or NDAs to manufacturing processes. We do it for products, okay? Now, I can further mitigate my regulatory risk by, at least in the first generation, limiting the surgeon's ability to print knees to correspond to sizes of knees that are already commercially available. Because then, if somebody asks me, well, how do I know if this is the right size? I say, you know what, that's a great question, but that's not a question for me. If you have a question on the sizing, you take that up with the people that got the previous knee onto the market, because we're making the same size that they are. All right? And we can further mitigate the, so step one is to bring this onto the market under a 510K. And by the way, I do not think the 510K is the most appropriate pathway for personalized medicine. I think we need a new pathway, and I've said this many times at FDA. But I've been guilty more so than probably anybody else. I've been involved in more 3D printed 510K clearances than probably anybody else. So I don't like using the 510K for this, but it's the best thing that we have at the moment, okay? So the first step is to bring it onto the market in this limited configuration. In other words, for knees that correspond to only the sizes that we have available now, and get it onto the market that way. Then we go back to the FDA, this is step two, as a label expansion, and we say, all right, you might remember a year or so ago we were here, we talked about this knee being printed in these sizes. Now I'm going to relax the criteria, and now I'm going to allow the surgeon to print a knee any size they want, as long as it's between X and Y. And where do X and Y come from? Simple. They come from the minimum and maximum sizes of the knees that are already commercially available. And then step three is we go back to the FDA with yet a third label expansion and remove that criteria completely. So for those of you that are in baseball, this is analogous to swinging for a home run versus swinging for a base hit. Everything else being equal, I would much prefer to swing for a home run. I would much prefer to bring a device onto the market with all the bells and whistles I possibly can. But just like in baseball, when you swing for a home run, you have a higher likelihood of striking out. And in this very risk-averse regulatory environment that we live in, many companies do not want to take that risk. So I'm not the regulatory police. I will never tell a company what they cannot do. Instead, I focus on what they can do. I say, all right, you don't want to swing for a home run, fine. Swing for a base hit. So the batter comes up, they get a base hit, the runner moves to first base, the next batter comes up, they get a base hit, the runner moves from first to second. At the end of the day, we get all around the bases. It's just a matter of, do we do it all at once, or do we do it in a series of baby steps? This has been the most effective way to bring truly new, truly novel technologies onto the market through, let's face it, a regulatory environment that simply does not encourage it. So this is the idea of the knee. Now let's shift over to the drug, because if you understand the regulatory logic, the regulation is not important. What is very important is the logic. Okay? If you understand the regulatory logic, it doesn't matter if we're talking about knees, drugs, or any other products, the logic is the same. So can we 3D print a drug? The answer is yes, we're already doing that as well. I mentioned a moment ago, about 2 years ago, FDA approved the first 3D printed drug. And here's the idea. Actually, let me just start the video here. There we go. And actually, if we can turn the sound down on this particular video, because their narration is not very good, I'll just do some talk over. You're going to see the pill being printed here layer by layer. But the important thing is the regulatory strategy. So how would we bring the first 3D printed drug onto the market? Well, as a huge hint, if you understand the regulatory logic of the knee, you apply exactly the same logic here. What if I can show the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, that ends up in the pill coming off of my 3D printer is exactly the same. Now, in the drug world, in CEDAR, there is no concept of substantial equivalence. It can't be basically the same. It has to be exactly the same. So what if I can show, and I don't have time to talk about the details of how we did this, but suffice it to say we did. What if we can show that the drug that ends up, the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient that ends up in the pill coming off of my 3D printer is exactly the same as the API in the pill coming off of my traditional tableting process? Once again, if I can do that, I can totally remove I can totally remove the drug from the equation. And now I just focus on validating the process, exactly the same as the knee. And I can further, just like the knee, mitigate my regulatory risk by the first version of this product bringing a pill onto the market that corresponds exactly to the same way that the existing pills do. In other words, the same dose, the same release rate or kinetics, and so on and so on. Now, clearly, this is not the future of this technology. This is the first step. Because the companies that I work with that are doing this kind of thing, they don't want to put those limitations on. But I say, you know what? From a regulatory perspective, that's the easiest way to bring it onto the market first. And that's exactly what we did about 2 years ago. We brought it onto the market with the same dose, the same kinetics, and so on. And then step two is to do a label expansion, to go back to the FDA and say, all right, you may remember a while ago we were here with our previous 3D printed pill. Now we're going to do the same thing, only now the physician or the pharmacist can print a pill with any dose they want as long as it's between X and Y. And where do X and Y come from? It's the minimum and maximum dosage of pills that are already available. And then we go back to FDA step 3 for the third label expansion, and we remove that criteria completely. Once again, at least it's the best way that I've found to bring truly new, truly novel technologies onto the market through a regulatory environment that is simply not designed, not intended to support it. And by the way, as you can imagine, one of the things that's bothered me for a very long time in medicine, I come from a medical background, I used to teach medical school back in the day, is why should some drug company decide how much drug to put in a pill? We've been practicing medicine like that for centuries. When you think about it, it makes absolutely no sense. I want the doctor to be able to decide how much drug to put in the pill and how fast it comes out, and for that matter, what combination of drugs. So imagine this not so hypothetical scenario. You get sick, you go to the doctor writes a script, but unlike in the current model where you go to take that script and you go to CVS or Walgreens and they take some pills out of a bottle, that script is sent to a 3D printer-like device in the back of the doctor's office. Those pills are printed for you in the office, the quantity that you need, the dosage that you need, the kinetics that you need, pardon me, the combination of drugs that you need, truly personalized medicine, and are put in a little bottle in a bag that are handed to you by the nurse on the way out the door just after you pay your bill. Think this is Star Trek-y? Well, it is for right now, but all of the technologies that are necessary to go into what I just described, all of them exist today. And several of the companies that I'm working with right now are doing those kinds of things. Unfortunately, one of the biggest challenges that's really holding us back are not the technical ones, they're the regulatory ones. But we're working on that. A couple of other quick examples before we run out of time here is, can we print a stent? Well, the first question to ask is, what kind of a stent? A bare metal stent? Well, yeah, we could do that, but that's pretty boring. How about a stent graft? That's a little more interesting, but that's still kind of boring. They've been around for a long time. How about a drug-eluting stent? Well, to a certain extent, that's pretty boring as well, because they've been around for a while. So let's kick things up a notch. How about being able to print a customized bioabsorbable stent? A customized bioabsorbable stent. Here's the idea. Got to start this video here. There we go. So again, it's just going to show a stent being printed. Imagine this happening right in the cath lab moments before it's put into the patient. That's not Star Trek-y either. We're starting to be able to do that. One of the big advantages of personalized medicine, whether it's for drugs or for devices, it doesn't matter, is to be able to take a truly personalized approach, to be able to design not just the shape of the device based on the patient's anatomy, but the biochemistry of the device based on the patient's physiology and molecular biology. That is a significant advantage, as well as being able to incorporate drugs and biologics and all kinds of other really cool things. I wish I had more time. This is not nearly as far off as it sounds. For that matter, a lot of you that are doing 3D printing today, you can probably do something like this, but how about, can your 3D printer do this? What we're talking about here is something called 4D printing, the fourth D being time. Why are we focusing on printing static objects? It makes absolutely no sense. So this technology is being developed by a group that I work with at MIT based on actually some plants and how certain plants are able to move, right? So there's no magic bells and whistles, there's no batteries, there's no wires here. This is all being done by the materials and by the printing process with just a tiny bit of imagination. You can imagine some of the applications of a technology like this in many different fields, including medicine and medical devices. And this is just the beginning. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So as we wrap this up, because I want to reserve a little bit of time for Q&A, how do we view the world? One of my many favorite quotes is, discovery is seeing what everybody else has seen and thinking what nobody else has thought. So from a technology perspective, it's very easy to look at what people are doing with 3D printing today and say, gee, that's interesting. But the question is, what else can we be using it for that we're not using it for yet? And how can we make that happen? And from a regulatory perspective, what does this mean? If you read and follow and understand a regulation like the hundreds or thousands of other people have done before you, then quite frankly, you're adding no value, and any monkey can do that. But if you read a regulation and see in it something that nobody else has seen before and figure out a way to use it that nobody else has used it before, now you're adding significant value, because quite frankly, there are not a lot of people that can do that. But that's a very good skill to have, and that's something that I really enjoy doing, is being able to work with some of the truly most advanced technologies and be able to bring them onto the market. You know, it's interesting. Oftentimes people come up to me and tell me they're working on something new or novel. And when they describe it to me in about 30 or 60 seconds, I quickly realize that this ain't new or novel. So a couple of years ago in one of my columns, I developed a litmus test. You think you're working on something new or novel? Ask yourself the following 3 questions. Is there regulation on it? Is there guidance on it? Is there reimbursement for it? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, is there regulation? Is there guidance? Is there reimbursement? I hate to burst your bubble, you ain't working on anything new or novel. Because part of my definition of new or novel means that there is no regulation, there is no guidance, there is no reimbursement. Okay? All right, anyway, wrapping this up. So it's not just what you look at that matters, it's what you see. So what do you see? At this point, we just have a couple of minutes left if we have time, Joe, for a couple of questions. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next speaker, John Spear.
I know there's a lot of demand for our next speaker, John Spear, but if we have a question, we'll gladly take it now. My friend from Brandwood Biomedical, Luis.
Michael, thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering about the IP part of this. If you're making a formulation be exactly like the previous formulation, does that mean only the same company can produce it?
That's a good question. I'm not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV. So the best answer I can give you is I'm giving you my advice from a regulatory perspective. Whether it's a device or a drug, we want to make it as close to the previous one as we can. Obviously, that presents some IP challenges. So you want to make it a little different, obviously, from an IP perspective, but not too different from from a regulatory perspective. It's a great question. That's a bit of a balance that we have to provide.
I'll say publicly here on our stage that Michael and John are, if they're willing, permanent MDTX faculty members, because you've got so much to share and so much demand for your knowledge that let's hear it from Michael, please.
Thank you, Joe.
You bet.
Thank you, everybody.